It's known by many names. Some find it offensive, others regard it as brown gold, a valuable soil builder and plant fertilizer.
When I was growing up, we always had to say it smells like money when the manure is out there.
For those who use it, manure has become a valuable commodity.
It's my impression that the value of manure is being better recognized. There's more demand for it.
We're seeing more and more farmers implementing satellite technology, GPS, a lot of things that are in use in other industries, really to manage this as a resource.
Science, various methods, and emerging equipment have made manure management a high-tech business.
With the world population expanding beyond 7 billion, animal manure utilization is going to be an important part of being able to provide the food we need for this growing population.
We're the leaders. We need to stay in that role, and agriculture is a great place to be.
In Norfolk, Nebraska, hundreds of farmers, industry professionals, commercial manure applicators, consultants, and educators attended the 2011 North American Manure Expo. Here, attendees learned how to make manure more effective and, in turn, farms more profitable. Industry professionals showcased the latest in technology to help protect the environment and cut costs.
I have to talk to the guys at the soil sample.
And educators taught the science behind how manure boosts crop yields. Manure is at the end and beginning of the nitrogen cycle. Cattle, swine, and other animals feed on corn, soybeans, and premixes of phosphorus, iron, and other minerals and vitamins essential for growth. The animals then convert feed into manure, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other nutrients beneficial to soil biology. This manure is applied to nearly 16 million acres of cropland across the United States, which is used to grow corn, soybeans, and other crops for another group of animals as the cycle begins again.
The value of manure is that it contains nutrients. It also is a way to recycle nutrients, so we do not have to get new nutrients from mines or produce it through high energy sources. It is very valuable for us to use it as a resource, a valuable resource.
Crops need nutrients to grow. After crop harvest and before the next growing season, those nutrients, which were depleted in the soil from the previous season, need to be replenished. Until recently, many growers gravitated to commercial fertilizers when replacing nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other nutrients in the soil. Charlie Wortman, a nutrient management specialist with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, says the benefits of manure are no longer ignored.
One thing that helped to boost its recognition were the high fertilizer prices that we saw in 2008. And crop producers could more easily see the value of the nutrients. It's my impression that the value of manure is being better recognized. There's more demand for it. There's less problem finding enough land to manage the nutrients in an agronomically efficient way.
There's so much demand, in fact, that some farmers who have animals but no cropland are selling manure to farmers who only raise crops and need fertilizer. Why spend money on what's technically a waste product? This graph shows the difference between two cornfields. One was grown with no manure, the other was enriched with manure from a swine operation. If manure can add 10 bushels an acre to a 160-acre field, with the sale price of corn hovering around $7 a bushel, the increase in profit can be over $11,000. And that's only above the ground. What happens below the soil makes calculating the worth of manure even more difficult, because manure improves soil quality and soil structure.
Well, it's true, it's easier to calculate dollar value based on what you can buy at the fertilizer dealer. And that's what a lot of times you do on nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, perhaps some of the micronutrients. But when you start looking at the biological life and the organic material, you can't go to the co-op and buy organic matter. You can't go to the co-op and buy those microbes that are going to get your soil system working for you.
A soil system that works for you means better water infiltration, less runoff, and less erosion. This means more precipitation and irrigation stays in the soil for the crop production, and with less runoff, fewer nutrients reach surface water. That's if the manure is applied correctly. While manure application may be known for its specialized equipment, the key to maximizing its potential is held in a relatively simple document. A Nutrient Management Plan, or NMP, helps manure applicators determine the correct amount of manure to distribute over a field. First, by understanding the soil's composition.
It is basically the backbone of our whole fertility system. So Without knowing your soil fertility to begin with, it's very difficult to go out and just develop a fertilizer program. And so we have our farms grid sampled, and we take that information and then develop our manure management plan after that.
Well, certainly from an agronomic standpoint, livestock producers are now better coordinating their crop production and livestock production. To do that, they need to know the crop requirements for the fertilizer nutrients, whether they're manure or commercial. And so a nutrient management plan lays all that out. How much manure you're going to produce, what's the analysis of it relative to nutrients, when are you going to handle it, and where did you put it. A nutrient management plan can be that simple.
Soil testing not only shows which nutrients various soils need, but also to what extent. Crops need certain nutrients, such as nitrogen, to grow. However, too much nitrogen will be detrimental to crops and the environment. Farmers use manure samples to determine how much and what nutrients are available in the manure. This is then used to balance what the crops need with what is available. This is the premise behind an NMP. An NMP helps applicators know how much is enough, but not so much that the manure has a negative effect.
The nutrient management plan can be a very positive thing for ensuring that the appropriate amount of manure is being applied at the right time in the right place to get the best yields and growth of their crops while also protecting the surface waters that surround them.
Manure itself isn't a constant. The nutrients change based on the diet of an animal. Cattle, swine, or chickens don't eat the same feed. Different minerals and vitamins are ingested, so different minerals and vitamins are excreted.
Different species have different composition of the main nutrients, and then of course it has to do with how they're fed and managed. So you can feed your cattle too much protein and you get higher nitrogen in your manure. You can feed phytase to your pigs and get less phosphorus. So we really do stress the fact that every livestock operation has to know what's in their manure before they spread it, and then we can make better recommendations for them.
The science has never been this exact, just as the equipment has never been this big. Manure spreaders in the early 1900s were horse-drawn and loaded by pitchfork. Since then, spreaders evolved and are now pulled and powered by tractors. Some are even mounted on trucks, allowing manure to be hauled greater distances. They've also grown to sizes that make early spreaders look like toys.
Manure spreaders that are holding 18, 20, maybe 24 tons. They're mammoth, The cost of these, I think some of these spreaders would cost between $150 to $250 new, back in the 30s and 40s. And now you're probably talking, 60 to maybe 100,000 for some of those large spreaders. And of course, then you have to have the horsepower and the large capacity tractor to pull those.
The size of the spreader or hauler depends on the size of the operation producing the manure, and more animals means more manure to haul. With more than one cow, hog, or chicken in every operation, it's not feasible to transport manure to the field every single day. Farmers have to hold the manure in stockpiles, storages, or lagoons until it can be applied to fields. Stockpiled manure is solid in form and comes from cattle feedlots, poultry farms, horse stables, some dairy farms, and swine farms that utilize straw or other bedding, which complicate manure handling and distribution.
Stockpiling is important because it allows the proper timing of the manure application. It allows us to conserve the nutrients in the best way, so we're able to make the most economic return for those nutrients. There's no sense in putting nutrients on before the crop needs are there or before the field is ready. It's much like you don't make all 3 meals when you wake up in the morning, because you'd have more food for the day than you need. The farm is going to use this like you would with your refrigerator. You're going to put your steak in the refrigerator and save it for dinner, and that's kind of what's going on here.
It matters how you build the pile, where you site the pile, and how long you let the pile exist before you spread it back out onto the land. The whole concept is that as soon as an available field opens up, that the material goes out where we want it to deliver nutrients. And so stockpiling is a temporary practice that livestock producers use to wait out the time period of when the next available crop field is ready to have that manure put out.
Manure comes in 3 consistencies: solid, liquid, and slurry, and each take different types of equipment to manage. Slurry manure is about the consistency of a milkshake. Liquid manure is like the consistency of water. They can be managed similarly in ponds, storages, or lagoons. Liquid manure can also be held in pits. Pits sit under barns and collect manure, while lagoons hold manure in an earthen structure until it can be applied. Both solid and liquid manure can be applied through different methods. Solid is generally applied using spreaders that displace the manure on top of the ground. It's taken from barns or stockpiles and loaded into a solid spreader. The spreader itself is driven by the tractor's PTO, or power takeoff. The PTO turns a gearbox that, in turn, carries manure on a conveyor belt to the back of the spreader, where it's dispersed with beaters. In Norfolk, the USDA Agricultural Research Service introduced a machine that could be the future of solid manure application. It's a manure subsurfer that injects dry manure below the soil's surface. This solid manure is relatively fine in particle size. It's housed in a box and then fed by augers down into the opening in the ground created by 2 coulters. So far, the subsurfer has shown positive results.
It's never hurt the plant yield, and in many cases it's actually increased the yield, sometimes as much as 30 to 35%. We think that's primarily because it keeps more nitrogen in the soil, and so in cases where the crop has plenty of moisture but the nutrient supply may be somewhat limited, it allows more efficient use of that nitrogen nutrient and gives more of a crop boost.
Pote says the key to crop growth is keeping these nutrients in the root zone of the crop instead of losing them to the atmosphere or water bodies. The subsurfer also minimizes odor by placing manure below the ground.
It seems to make a big difference, and if it's widely adopted, we think it will make a big difference in the whole industry. What it allows the farmer to do is to use those nutrients a whole lot more efficiently.
This same method has been used in the application of liquid manure for years. It allows less of the valuable ammonia content to be lost or volatilized into the air. Slurry manure from manure storages is pumped into a spreader tank. The unit then takes the manure to the designated area of a field. On the rear of the tank are chisels, sweeps, discs, or coulter-type openers that create a trench in the ground when lowered. The manure is then pumped from the tank, down tubes, and into the ground. There are a variety of incorporators that disturb residue differently. Immediate incorporation of manure injection can disturb less of the residue or organic material on the surface of the soil, but each method of application has its benefits and its drawbacks.
When I was growing up, we always had the saying, it smells like money when the manure is out there. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the public want the producers to incorporate the manure to reduce the odor. Yes, that does reduce the odor. Direct injection does that as well. Anytime you get the manure below the soil surface. But when it comes to tillage, I don't want to do that, to incorporate, because I'm breaking down that soil structure, I'm breaking down the soil biological life that I'm trying to build. And so I want the public to realize that yes, you might smell manure for a day or two, but it's building the soil, it's going to keep the soil in place.
Liquid manure can also be distributed through sprinkler systems such as center pivots, traveling guns, and other portable devices such as K-lines. Traveling gun systems are wheeled carts supplied with hoses and a large nozzle unit that sprinkles manure. Special reels are used to supply the big gun cart, much like the reels used for garden hoses. K-lines and other portable irrigation systems can also be used to distribute animal manures. Center pivots are overhead sprinkler irrigation systems consisting of a pipe and support trusses mounted on wheeled towers. Sprinklers are mounted on the pipe and the system rotates around a fixed point in the field. Center pivots have the advantage of being able to manage large volumes of manure in a short period of time. These sprinkler systems are very efficient, cost-effective, and can accurately apply manure with even distribution. They can also apply manure when a crop is growing, providing nutrients when the crops need them most.
From a production point of view, we can distribute this material in a very uniform manner, not better than the ground rigs, for sure equal to, and we can do it at a time when the crop needs the material that we're going to apply, the nutrients that are in the material. And so that really is a benefit from the water quality point of view, because now we don't have nutrients out there in the soil that could potentially be leached.
One of the main advantages of running K-lines, big guns, and to a greater extent, center pivots, is the time frame in which manure can be applied. Hauling liquid manure in spreader tanks is a time-consuming process. Tanks must be loaded, travel to the designated destination in a field, unload, and then travel back to load again. With center pivots, the only travel involved is the liquid itself, moving through the pipes of an irrigation system.
Part of the rationale for running the liquid manure through center pivots is due to the large volume of water that we develop by virtue of flushing the manure out of the production facility rather than handling it by hand or having it go on into an underground pit. And so we generate a lot of water in this process, and basically if we tried to distribute all that water with a ground applicator, it would take months for that to happen.
The option of center pivots for distribution is just one of the many advances in manure application. Technological progress in agriculture has increased the maximization of yield, while at the same time protecting the environment. Soil testing for nutrients is a common practice, but the use of GPS and smartphones to guide and monitor equipment in the fields is still growing. Irrigation systems now feature a telemetry system, allowing a farmer to turn on, turn off, or simply monitor the pivot from a computer or smartphone.
We have full control and monitoring capabilities, which allows us to have the pivot see where it's at in the field, what's going on with it, change the rate, change the end gun settings, have a history log so we know exactly when an application occurred at, and change that application depending on what's going on with the weather environment in the area as well. So when something's gone on in the middle of the night, we can change the rate if we've had a little bit of rainfall. We can also completely shut down a system if something changes on the application out there that we need to shut the machine off right away. We know about it right away.
We absolutely want to know how much effluent was applied, when it was applied, and where it was applied to, and being able to automate some of those routines. I think the average person would be very surprised to know how much technology is in motion on the family farm today.
These technological preventative measures cut down on the time it would normally take to travel to the field. They're one of many environmental precautions taken by farmers and applicators.
One of the things we do, we have now installed a monitoring system that goes under the pivots that calls our cell phone within seconds of that system stopping for any reason whatsoever. And so within a matter of minutes, we can be there to correct whatever issue is there.
Widely available to the public, a global positioning system, or GPS, allows a more proactive approach to manure application. Much like the GPS in your car, farmers use GPS to guide where they've been in the field and where they still need to go. Applicators can also use it to see which area of a field is getting a specific rate of manure.
We use the GPS to create a as-applied map for the producer and the crop consultant so they can go back and apply that to yield data, their nutrient management plan to show what nutrients were put down on the field so they can plan for the next growing crop year of what's available in the field for nutrient.
We're all concerned about the environment. Producers and the public want to maintain the environment as best we can. And for livestock farmers, what they're concerned about is not over-applying nutrients from manure or under-applying nutrients. And GPS equipment allows them to measure the nutrient content of manure, but more important than that is mapping where it's applied on the field. And that way they can avoid under-applying nutrients and then also avoid over-applying nutrients.
This technology, along with larger equipment and increased rules, regulations, and planning, has given rise to a new job, the professional manure applicator.
So there are small businesses focused entirely on animal manure management. Businesses that make equipment, people that apply manure for a living every day, people that develop permits, nutrient management plans, crop consultants that make agronomic recommendations and broker manure, trade and sell manure. It is a group of very skilled, very professional people that do this work.
Custom manure applicators specialize in hauling and applying manure commercially. Aaron Ross's company pumps over 200 million gallons of manure each year in the Midwest from Minnesota to Texas.
Well, the reason the farmers hire us instead of putting it on themselves is it's a couple of reasons. But probably the greatest reason is because of the cost of the equipment and the labor intensity of it. In order for them to hire the people to do it and keep all the equipment on hand, and it's kind of like a combine where it's very seasonal, they would have to be a very large operator to justify that. So it's much cheaper for them to hire it done.
Ross was one of many custom applicators at Norfolk's 2011 Manure Expo. And while they were there to look at the newest, biggest, and smartest equipment, Ross says they were also there because they care about what they do. David Anderson offers insurance options to applicators, and he believes the public may not understand how serious these applicators are about their careers.
Well, the interesting thing about it is, is that you'd be surprised how many of these guys have entire crews that, are college educated. They treat this as a professional job. That's why they're here today, because they're here to learn about what they do, learn how to do what they do better, make those connections, make those networking contacts, and really improve the state of their industry. The guys who are here are the ones who are doing it on a year-round basis. These are the guys who really care about what they do.
The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, imposes strong regulations on the application of manure, inspecting farms and performing flyovers to look at facilities that might be discharging. Ross says, contrary to negative perceptions, applicators do care about affecting what's around them.
I think the question is, what about the environment? We like to think of ourselves as true environmentalists. We are very concerned about any runoff type waters. We're very concerned about over applying. We get the latest in technology in order to keep that from happening, and it's sort of a proactive approach to environmentalist concerns.
It's become such a big business, and it's such a valuable commodity that when you assess dollars to a commodity like manure, the problems go away, because who wants to pay those kind of dollars for application or transport costs and put it in a place where they don't want it? It's a very strange place where regulation, economics, and agronomy all want the same thing. We don't want to be putting nutrients where we don't need them.
In the end, the technology and methods behind modern manure management serve the science. The main goal is to increase crop yields by maximizing the use of manure's nutrients. While that can mean more money for the farmer, it also means more supply and more food for the consumer.
We're being challenged to double our grain outputs as an agricultural community by the year 2030. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to continue to bring this technology and bring it back to the farm. And there is no place on the planet where there's more applied technology in motion than on the farm. The challenge of doing this and maintaining a food supply that people can afford is not a small challenge. And I think it's important that the average consumer understand these folks are running businesses, but they're also environmental stewards. And I think many times people drive by an agricultural operation, they get a whiff of something that they don't necessarily like, and they automatically associate that with something negative. The last thing I think anybody wants is to see our food sources out, moved offshore and us becoming food importers. We're the leaders. We need to stay in that role, and agriculture is a great place to be.
The world's population is now over 7 billion people. The United Nations estimates that by the year 2050, the world population will increase to 9.3 billion. Manure is a valuable soil builder and plant fertilizer, and can help feed this growing population. It reduces reliance on fossil fuels and is a recycling system that is sustainable. It continues to prove its worth as brown gold for those who use it and for those who consume the food it grows.
Welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and for the next half hour we're going to be talking about pork because Illinois is the fourth largest producer of pork in the country. And to do that, we're going to have a hog farmer and someone from Prairie Rivers Network. Let me introduce first from outside of Eureka, Chad Lehman, who is a third-generation farmer raising hogs on a, how many hogs do you have, Chad?
We market between 25 and 30,000 a year.
Okay, and at any given time you have how many on?
At any given time between 8 to 9,000.
8 to 9,000?
Correct.
And also with us is Dr. Stacy James. Dr. James is with the Prairie Rivers Network. What is Prairie Rivers Network?
Prairie Rivers Network is Illinois' statewide river conservation organization, and we're the state affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation.
So you look at water issues primarily?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you both for being here. We're going to show you a video in just a couple of moments of what a large hog operation looks like. In fact, it will be Chad Lehman's. Chad will describe it to you. But first, I want to make sure that you understand some of the terminology that we're going to be hearing. We're going to hear the Livestock Facilities Maintenance Act. That's LFMA. You'll hear them refer to that in the acronym. We'll also hear CAFO. That is a confined or concentrated animal feed operation. Some people refer to it as factory farm, but family farm is another term, but CAFO. So be familiar with those terms as we go through the program. With that, let's show everybody what your particular operation is like just outside of Eureka. We have a video that our photographer Stacy shot just a couple of weeks ago. It was the nastiest day of the year.
Yeah, it was really cold that day a couple weeks ago. It was probably 20 degrees outside and winds were howling and the snow was blowing that day.
And yet it was warm inside.
It was. The curtains, as you can see, are up. The hogs inside this barn are warm. It was about 65 degrees in there. This gives you a shot of some 80-pound pigs.
And there's the temperature, actually.
Temperature controller allows us to maintain a adequate temperature in there. There's a shot of the feed mill, and this is back in the barn of a picture of the feed coming into the feeders. And there's a shot of the feeders. Adjustment of those feeders is critical, and we want the pigs having feed and water 24/7. See a picture of the water cups there.
When you say feed, you're talking corn and beans and...
Primarily corn and soybean meal. This would be a picture of the fans, the ventilation in the barns, the feed lines. This is what a slotted floor looks like. The manure passes through these slots into concrete pits below. This would be a picture of our wagon with which we apply the manure. These are the injectors on the back that allow us to place it anywhere from 4 to 6 inches below the surface of the soil. There's a picture of a flow meter that measures the rate at which we are applying the manure. And then this would be a picture inside the tractor cab. We use a global positioning system to map where this manure is applied and at what rate. And then these are downloaded onto a computer at the end of the day and go into file for record keeping.
So Chad, you raise corn and beans on the farm as well.
That's correct.
And so you take that corn and beans, it's refined in some way, and then you add some nutrients to it?
Yeah, we will grind the corn and add soybean meal. Those are the primary ingredients in the diet, and our nutritionist helps us formulate that, and along with our vet, and then it's fed to the pigs, and the goal is to obviously have the best feed conversion we can. In other words, how many pounds of feed it takes to put on a pound of gain.
Let's get to the major issue, and that would be one of manure. You have, as you mentioned, a concrete pit underneath where all the manure, the urine, etc., falls down into a pit. Describe that. How deep is that?
Those pits are 8 to 10 feet deep. That gives us storage for approximately a year. It's our desire to apply the majority of the manure in the fall after the crop has been removed, and then the nutrients in that manure will feed the next spring's crop.
Stacy, when we talk about the application of manure, is Chad doing this in the preferred way as far as Prairie Rivers Network is concerned?
Absolutely. I think injection of waste is very important instead of allowing it to sit on the surface. Unfortunately, though, our livestock regulations are relatively slack in some way compared to other states. And so, for example, it's actually an option. You don't have to inject your waste. You don't have to incorporate your waste. You can just surface apply it. The danger of surface applying is if a storm event comes along, there's snow, there's rain, it's possible for some of that waste to go off into nearby waterways. It's also a potential odor issue if waste is sitting on top.
When you knife in or inject, what is the odor implication versus surface application?
I don't know whether you'd say it's probably reduced by 3 or 4 times. I would say to put it under the soil and then cover it back up with a layer of soil. It also allows us to maintain those nutrients. We don't want nitrogen leaching off into the air, so it's in our best interest to put it in underground.
And from an odor perspective, how long does the odor last if you're injecting?
We always think that if you surface apply, you might smell it for 3 days. If you inject it, you might smell it for a day.
Let's go back to the issue of runoff, whether it be during the winter with snow melting or whether it be rain. What happens when the manure runs off of property and goes into some sort of waterway?
Well, when that happens, there's a variety of options depending on the amount of waste that we're talking about. In the worst case scenarios, you might get tens, hundreds of thousands of gallons of waste going into the stream. That is a worst case scenario. It's a rare event, but it does happen. In those instances, you can have fish kills. And that's what really attracts the attention of the public and the media and makes people nervous. In other situations, though, it might be a lower amount, what you call kind of a sublethal amount, where there's just enough waste in the water to perhaps elevate the nitrogen and the phosphorus, maybe cause some algae blooms, maybe cause some stress in the aquatic life that lives in those streams.
There is one other method of holding manure on a hog farm. We've discussed Chad Lehman's method of having a concrete pit underneath the actual buildings, but there's also the lagoon, and we just want to show you what a lagoon looks like. You do not have lagoons, but this is a lagoon operation. Is this cheaper, I assume, to go to a lagoon rather than building the big pits underneath?
Sure, it would be cheaper to store it in a lagoon.
Are there concerns that Prairie Rivers Network has about lagoons versus deep pits?
Well, in a lagoon sort of situation, you're exposed to the elements. So if there is a heavy rainfall event, and if you have inadequate storage capacity left in your lagoon, there's the possibility for that lagoon to actually overflow. In some instances, we've had livestock operators who are dealing with a situation where they don't have enough waste storage capacity in their outdoor structures. A storm event comes along, and in the worst sort of situations, they actually are pumping out that waste very quickly to either apply it to a field, or in the most egregious situations, they might actually pump that waste into a nearby ravine, getting rid of it.
In citing approval by the through the Livestock Facilities Maintenance Act, LFMA, it's okay to have a lagoon operation in the state of Illinois, is that correct?
Absolutely. There's just certain building specifications. Another thing to point out, though, is that there's no actual siting setback from streams. You can site your facility as close to a stream as you like. That is of great concern to us because if you have hundreds of thousands of gallons of waste sitting right next to a stream, there is that potential for pollution.
Let me get back to that for just a moment, because there are siting setback requirements for wells and for residential properties, are there not?
Right. As part of the Livestock Facility Management Act, that also has a certain segment that deals with comprehensive nutrient management plan. That is how we dispose of the manure, and that is where the setback rules are in place for manure application next to wells or surface water.
But there is no setback requirement for the lagoon.
For lagoons or for any new livestock facilities, no minimum setback from streams. Same for lakes. And also we believe that the siting setback from wells is inadequate. The siting setback for new facilities is 100 feet from a non-potable well and about 200 feet from a potable well. Is 100 or 200 foot setback of a well from hundreds of thousands of gallons of waste adequate? These rules were written years ago, before this intense concentration of animals that we're seeing now. So we're in favor of those rules being revised to be more protective.
You have some monitoring requirements. Are those around wells or are those around the pit?
Those are around our pits. We are required to submit quarterly drain samples, which we will pull the sample from the footing tile that goes around the pit and send it into a lab for analysis. There's a baseline nutrient level that is established when you build the building, and then each quarter after that, those nutrients are examined to make sure you don't have a spike in them. Those nutrients would be things such as nitrates, phosphates, chlorides, and etc.
But there's no requirement to monitor around potable water sources.
To my knowledge, no.
And so that's where your concern is 100 foot or 200 foot, is that sufficient?
Correct.
Do you have any studies to look at to say maybe 100 feet needs to be more distance?
Well, I know that in states such as Minnesota and Wisconsin, they actually have 1,000-foot setback from community water supply wells. But in our state, researchers have documented that some wells in some parts of Illinois have been contaminated by livestock waste, or at least bacteria and other pollutants indicative of livestock waste. And these wells are in heavy livestock areas, so there's high correlations that in some cases our wells are being contaminated. And I think, we're nothing without our water, and so if we don't do things to protect it, we're endangering our future and our future sustainability.
Chad is a farmer who wants to have a good reputation. Do these kinds of things concern you in light of that there might be some farms that are not as conscientious as Stacy wants them to be?
Sure. I can only speak to our operation. I do believe that every group or organization probably has an element that they would rather not have represent them, and farming is no different. I do think it's unfair to speak in generalities and characterize all producers as maybe slacking because one has.
You happen to have gone, you're abiding by every regulation and beyond, actually. When you take a look at your farm, I visited your farm, and there are concrete walls around your fuel sources in case there's a spill there. You have the deep pits so that there won't be overflow. You monitor on a regular basis. What I hear from some farmers is that that's a lot of money to invest, but you're still a solvent operation.
It is. It costs money, but at the same time, we want to do this for years to come. I have 4 daughters. My wife and I have 4 daughters, and they're growing up on the farm. I think it's natural for a farmer to want to be a good steward of the animals and the land that he is in care of, and hopefully be able to pass that down to future generations.
As far as the Prairie Rivers Network is concerned, Stacy, what do you want to see happen either with the LFMA or with EPA or other monitoring agencies?
Well, for one, it would be great if IEPA had more inspectors. So recently, IEPA has come under fire from US EPA for not having an adequate livestock regulatory program. As a result of that, they have hired a few more inspectors, but I think they could use more. Right now, they inspect maybe 150 facilities a year. That's less than 1% of what's out there. So we would like a higher inspection rate to be assured that more facilities are in compliance. Other things we'd like to see is just a general improvement in the regulations so that they're more protective of the environment and the people living near these facilities. I know private property rights are a big issue out there in the ag community, but one thing I think that's overlooked is the private property rights of those individuals who live near these facilities. In many cases, people are complaining about odor issues, they're complaining about water contamination issues, they're concerned about well pollution, and so I think our regulations need to be updated to reflect some of these concerns.
Do the regulations need to be upgraded?
I believe that the regulations that are in place are sufficient. I think that we all need to be conscious of our neighbors. We need to take care of the land. We need to be able to live at peace with our neighbors. So no, I think the regulations are in place. In fact, I would hate to see more.
Is there more of a concern regarding getting some of the farms that are not abiding by the current regulations to abide by them than it is to say we need stricter regulations?
Well, there's certainly what you call the bad actors out there. So those people who aren't abiding by the regulations that are out there. So if more people were abiding by our regulations, there would be much less cause for concern. But the other issue out there is that certain facilities were kind of grandfathered in when the Livestock Management Facilities Act was passed in 1997. And so those facilities, in some cases, in some ways, are not meeting current standards. In some cases, those facilities don't have the waste storage capacity that we're now insisting that facilities have.
Your facility was built after LFMA was enacted?
That is correct. The newer barns were built after that.
So you have to abide by those particular
That is
guidelines?
correct. Any expansion to a site has to abide by LFMA regulations.
The new facilities that are being built, and there are several. There's one up near Sonneman, there's one out in Hancock County, there's one down in McDonough County near Blandonsville. They're in various stages of approval process. What is the basic approval process for a new or expanded facility?
It needs to first clear the Department of Ag, and that's who administers the LFMA. And so it needs to clear those requirements, and then it also has to be approved by a county board.
If the county board and the Department of Agriculture are approving these sites, do you have a problem with that process?
In some cases, because of the nature of the regulations, yes. So they are evaluating, for example, whether or not the facility will have adequate or reasonable odor control technologies. Well, what does that mean? Adequate, reasonable, that's a very relative term. Also, there are some concerns that the local county boards, they are not evaluating the full application when they're voting. They're not given all the materials that they should have in order to evaluate whether or not the applicant is meeting the so-called 8 siting criteria of the Livestock Act.
They're not given all the information before they take a vote?
Correct.
At the county level?
Yes.
Is there a reason why that happens? That's legal by the state act?
It is nebulous. So my understanding is that in several cases, the county board has not been given all the information that you really need to evaluate whether or not a proposed facility is going to be in compliance with the act. So for example, you have to do some borings, some soil borings beneath your proposed buildings to determine if aquifer material is present. Because if aquifer material is present, you've got some groundwater issues potentially to deal with, and you might have to build your facility to better standards in order to protect that groundwater. So that boring data is not necessarily provided to the county board at the time that they're voting, but they should have it.
The vote at the county level is just a majority vote, as I understand it. If one extra yes vote and it's approved. McDonough County Board, I believe the vote was 10-7 in favor of approving the facility that is planned for outside of Blandonsville. Should it be a higher level of approval, such as 2/3 or 3/4, or has Prairie Rivers Network even approached that topic?
Well, I believe that actually the expertise for evaluating whether the act is going to be met by this proposed facility lies within the Department of Agriculture, and that it's the department and their engineers who should be evaluating these applications, and that the county board should kick in on evaluating some separate criteria that they are more suited to evaluating, such as whether or not this proposed facility is in alignment with the development goals, say, of the area, or whether the proposed facility will be able to meet the local traffic issues like load capacity of the roads.
When you did your expansion, because you've been raising hogs for the last 60 years, a little over 60 years on that property, you went through the same process through the county board, and did you reach out to your neighbors and did you talk to the county board members and explain what you were doing, that you were trying to meet every standard that's set by the state?
Yeah, I think we tried to be proactive with our neighbors first and foremost, because that's who it affects the most, and explain to them what we were wanting to do, explain to them that we're still a family farm. My dad and I are partners in the business and hope to be for many years, but we have had to achieve some efficiencies of size to be able to support more than one or two families. And so as we expanded, we took into account what the effects would be on the neighborhood and really have a great working relationship with our neighbors.
But that's because you reached out in advance, you were proactive.
I think it's important. Life is too long to not get along with your neighbors.
He's doing the right thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't always happen. In some cases, there's great animosity that develops, and it's really unfortunate because people want to enjoy their homes and enjoy their communities.
So if the state goes to stricter standards, if that were to occur, might that cause a problem in terms of the number of hog operations in the state of Illinois, and we might see fewer hog producers in the state? And would that be a bad thing?
Well, I don't know if it would affect things because other states that have more stringent regulations than ours are not seeing some great cutback in the amount of facilities. I think exports are up in the hog industry. We're doing a great job of sending meat overseas. So it is a very prosperous industry actually in these hard economic times.
A closing thought from you, Chad. She mentioned that we're exporting a lot. Is that indeed the case, that it's prosperous right now?
That is the case. Exports are good. Demand is good. You're seeing a growing middle class globally, especially China and India. Japan and Mexico continue to be large customers of our pork.
With that being the case, would stricter standards, and I know depending on how strict they were, would stricter standards cause you to be less competitive with some of the foreign operations that grow pigs?
Certainly.
So you would prefer that the standards stay the way they are?
Right.
And enforcement be the issue?
I think enforcement is the issue, and I think the state does not have the funds, has not had the funds, and I don't know if they will to be able to do what she would like them to do.
And you'd like to go a little bit further?
Yep.
And with that, we have run out of time, but I thank you both. Appreciate it. It's a complex topic, and we appreciate both Chad Lehman and Stacy James for sharing with us on the discussion of what to do about the issue of confined animal feeding operations. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation as well, and we invite you to join us again next week on At Issue.
There are two undeniable truths in the dairy business. Cows have to be milked, and manure has to be cleaned up. At the 11 dairies that make up Fair Oaks Farms in northwest Indiana, there is plenty of both. About 30,000 cows produce more than 250,000 gallons of milk per day on Fair Oaks' sprawling 19,000 acres. Those cows also produce about 1.5 million gallons of manure per day. That's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Amid growing concern about the odor caused by all that manure, Fair Oaks made a critical decision over a decade ago. Instead of relying on the traditional disposal method of storing manure until conditions were right to spread it on area farm fields, Fair Oaks began experimenting with anaerobic digestion. Today, it uses a system of digesters to convert manure into renewable natural gas that powers a fleet of 42 trucks with Kenworth T440 tractors powered by Cummins Westport natural gas engines. The trucks haul milk around the clock to processing plants in Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee.
Part of running a dairy is dealing with the waste that comes out of the cows. And so as part of dealing with that waste, we've tried to find innovative ways to convert that waste to energy.
Storman has been overseeing projects at Fair Oaks since 2000. The farm partners with AMP Americas to produce the compressed natural gas, or CNG, used to fuel the trucks.
Our fleet is really pressed hard. We are running 42 trucks delivering 53 loads of milk a day. Those trucks average 720 miles a day, so each truck is averaging over 250,000 miles a year.
Fair Oaks is also a tourist attraction, and it produces enough renewable natural gas to power a restaurant and cheese factory, as well as the buses to take visitors on barn tours. Fair Oaks also sells some of its gas to a utility company. Here's how the Fair Oaks system works. Sand is used for the cows' bedding, and 3 times a day, while the cows are milked, the sand and manure is vacuumed up and delivered to a digester. Water is added to help separate the manure and sand, and the sand is dried and reused. The watered-down manure goes into a large holding tank, where natural organisms in the manure create gas. The gas is processed to remove impurities, resulting in a final product that is around 98% natural gas. Fair Oaks has invested several $1 million into its digesters and estimates they remove about 95% of the manure's objectionable odor.
We have to look at it as an entire system. So as we look at the entire system from the picking up of the manure until the delivery to the trucks, it's probably going to be a 10-year payback.
Fair Oaks has been using Cummins Westport's 9-liter ISL-G, knowing the engine was undersized for pulling typical payloads of close to 80,000 pounds. In the fall of 2013, it began converting its fleet to Cummins Westport's new ISX-12G engine, a larger engine designed for the kind of demands Fair Oaks is putting on its fleet.
They're really making the lives of their neighbors better by reducing the smells, but then they're also reducing their dependence on oil and using a sustainable, renewable fuel.
After 2 years of running its trucks on this renewable fuel source, Fair Oaks estimates it is conserving about 2 million gallons of diesel fuel annually.
We believe that as we start to power more CNG trucks, there will be an increased demand for the renewable natural gas. And so yes, the simple answer to your question is, this becomes a model that can be reproduced all over the United States.